Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another exciting visit with Dr. Ronald Brown. This one is going to be to the wonderful city of Petra, one of the lost cities of the world. Once again, our outline, a little bit about the origins of religions and how they develop over time. Who were the Nabateans who founded Petra? And then what was going on in Petra in the last decades of the before Christ and the first centuries of the Common Era, and how Petra was central in the evolution of Christianity and Islam and Judaism, and Petra today. Well, here we see a picture of me on a camel in Jerusalem. So I've been very involved and very interested in the Middle East. So let's get started. Cheapo air, I always take the cheapest flight. So I got a flight from New York to India with a stop off in Petra in January 1998. That's my winter break. A good time to travel to a warm place like India or Petra. A bit about the origins of religions. Religions evolve. They are not static. They are constantly changing. Judaism at the time of Abraham and the time today, passing through the two empires in Israel, exile in Egypt. Religions are evolving. They're changing as I speak with the evolution of evangelical Christianity here in the United States. We tend to make a tree of religions, saying that they are all independent and emerge and grow like branches on a tree. Well, I don't like that parallel because religions are constantly in dialogue. We can't think of Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa here in New York without understanding that religions borrow from each other. Monotheism emerged in ancient Babylon and Persia with the Zoroastrians. It emerged in Egypt with Akhenaten, and then it was accepted by Judaism as a fundamental fact of their religion. Well, Petra was ideally located for this massive exchange of ideas and religions. A map on the left shows the Middle East, where you had Babylon and Persia, Arabia, Africa, all exchanging ideas by the trade routes. If you look at the map on the left, you see almost in the middle there, Petra with the X is a crucial route from the south through Arabia on to Egypt, up north into Palestine, Israel, the Persian and Babylonian empires. And Petra was also central to the Great Silk Route, which went from Xi'an in China across through Samarkand and ended up going into Petra. And from Petra, it went on to Egypt and down into Arabia and Rome and Byzantium. So the city of Petra is a central trade route. Ideas, silk from Asia, porcelain from Asia, and armies from Rome, Byzantium, Greece, marching through Petra. Well, the Nabateans established their empire in the 3rd century before the Common Era, and it lasted until about 700 AD. And it was strategically located between Egypt to the west, north was Israel, Lebanon, Syria. To the east was Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran. And so it was a central crossroads. The Arabs for the south were having their trade routes through Petra. So the timing of the Nabatean Empire is crucial. 3rd century before the Common Era, crossing the birth of Jesus into 700. But by that time, Christianity, modern Judaism, synagogue Judaism, and the rising Islamic world all intersected at this empire. To the west was the powerful Egyptian Empire, which constantly was expanding, bringing new ideas, new trade, wars, going through Petra as Egypt expanded up along the coast of Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and into Syria. And Egypt had a very high civilization, bringing its ideas with it. To the east was the Babylonian Empire, that whenever Babylon got big and powerful, it of course would expand into Turkey, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, down into the Arabian world, even at times conquering the ancient Egyptian Empire, bringing new ideas, ideas of religion, of technology, of science, of literature. And Petra was right at the intersection. One side was Babylon, the other side was Egypt. So many of our wonderful stories that are well preserved in the Jewish Bible were from the Enuma Elish and ancient Babylonian story. Creation story, Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden, the flood, Noah, the Tower of Babel. These are all ancient Babylonian legends, which when Babylon was powerful, it would spread these legends, and they were accepted by later religions such as Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. So there's this constant exchange of ideas taking place around the world. And Petra, at the time of Jesus, and before and after with the rise of Islam, Petra was strategically located to be a clearinghouse for new ideas. Petra was also influenced by Alexander the Great, who introduced Greek culture, Greek architecture, the Greek myths, Greek way of dressing, Greek love of theaters. And so as Alexander the Great in the 300s before the Common Era spread Greek ideas around the world, and under the Greek Empire, trade flourished. So merchants from faraway China and India and Persia could easily pass over the Fertile Crescent down through the straits between Lebanon and Israel and Palestine to Petra and on into Egypt. The Buddhists under Ashoka Empire of the 300s before the Common Era also united what is today India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and created a great empire that spread the ideas of Buddhism to China, but also brought ideas and products through the Middle East. And we see the great trade routes going across Persia and Arabia, and the sea routes going up the Arabian Gulf, and Petra once again at the crossroads of these trade routes. When the Persians got powerful, they too expanded their empire. Wars against the Greeks, wars conquering Egypt. And we see the Persian Empire in 490 before the Common Era, expanding, taking over what is today Turkey, Armenia, Egypt, Northern Arabia, all of these bringing new ideas under Darius the Great, Zoroastrianism, the first monotheistic religion of ancient times. These ideas were current in Petra. Think of all the merchants, the traders, gathering, exchanging products, but exchanging ideas. If you were a firm believer in the monotheism of Zoroastrianism, You would be in vicious dialogue with the Arabs and the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians who had hundreds of gods. The Jewish empire grew under David and Solomon, gradually expanding to include as one of its kingdoms controlled by David and Solomon, the kingdom of Edom in the south, where we see Petra as one of the great cities of the empire of David and Solomon. So Jewish traders would be there, maybe going further south to the Jewish communities in Yemen and Arabia and Egypt. In fact, Petra claims to have the tomb of Aaron, who was the brother of Moses. And this was attested to by Flavius Josephus, the great Jewish historian, in his book, The Antiquities of the Jews of 94 AD, claiming that this was, in fact, the tomb of Aaron, the brother of Moses, on a hilltop overlooking the city of Petra. Petra was also a trading point when the kingdoms of Meroe and Aksum and eventually Ethiopia rose to power. We see on the map on the right the kingdom of Aksum expanding trading links up the Red Sea to Petra and to Egypt and to the Middle East. Ideas of the gods, the philosophies, the teachings of the ancient African kingdom of Aksum. So you'd have another person sitting around the campfire, drinking beer in Petra, exchanging ideas about the kingdom, about gods, about religions, about legends. Early Christianity began to expand. Following the death of Jesus, Christian missionaries went down as far as Ethiopia, Ethiopia converting to Christianity, and the Egyptian Christians and the Ethiopian Christians were great missionaries, building monasteries in the woods and in the deserts around Petra. And so still another level of intellectual challenges, new ideas, was circulating through the magnificent city of Petra. To the south of Petra were the Arab tribes, with their many gods and with their ideas of religion and warfare. From far south, modern day Yemen, traders would go up either by sea or by land across Arabia, stopping off in Petra, the gateway to the Mediterranean world. And as Islam began to grow, Muslims started circulating in Petra. And so we see that Petra was really a crossroads. Trade routes going across Asia into the Middle East included Petra as one of their main trading posts, where spices from Arabia, slaves from Africa would be sold and transported back to Xi'an in China and to Rome and Byzantium. So Petra was a center for trade, and not just products, but ideas. Petra was founded approximately 400 before the Common Era, and its high point was from that time until about 106 after the death of Jesus. It was estimated that it had a population of 30,000 at its high point when it ruled over, as you can see on the map on the right, an area that included most of Jordan, Gaza, large areas of Israel, the Sinai Peninsula, and down deep into Arabia. So it was a major populated city. I was there in January 6 and 7, 1998. And as you walk into the ruins of the city, you walk through this narrow passageway, which you see on the right, and there you see carved into the red stone of the mountain what is called the treasury, a mixture of Greek and Nabatean architecture. Well, that's what most people visit, but they forget that surrounding the area, there is all kinds of places to visit, which we are going to see some of them today. There's me standing in there in the area with my donkey friends and me taking a break. I was there in January, and so it was still very, very hot. As I said, most people only visit the Big Valley area. But if you are an explorer like me, you go out into the desert surrounding the city, and you see these rather exotic tombs carved into giant boulders, which are basically outcroppings of the rock surrounding the place. One hillside is literally covered with tombs carved into the mountains, very similar to the Ethiopian tradition of carving the facade of a building on a mountain or into a mountain and then hollowing out the mountain. Now, these are usually called royal tombs. Since we have no writing about them, a lot of this is just pure speculation. Treasury dates from the first century, and on the upper right you see the doorway into it with its ornate carvings of Greek architecture. Another building outside dates from the first century, and people call it the monastery, but surrounding it were gardens, irrigation canals. The Nabateans were great in managing water to make the desert bloom. Up on a hilltop is what is considered the high place of sacrifice to Dushara, who we believe was the principal guardian deity of the area. The great temple complex dates from the first century AD, and we see the ruins, which are strongly influenced by Greek and Roman architecture. And once again, it was a big open space that we assume was a place of worship or something like that. Wadi Rum, another fantastic place. A wadi in Arabic is a dry riverbed that on the rare occasions when it rains in the area, it rains very hard. And this dry desert is turned into a torrent of water, sweeping everything in front of it away. And this is the world that the great Lawrence of Arabia, who traveled throughout this area and wrote about it, is referring to the desert area around Petra and further north and south into Syria and deep into the Arabian Peninsula. There you see him dressed as he would have been as a Arab sheik. Now, we do know a little bit about the Nabatean alphabet. Certain stones have carvings in them. The language, we don't know what it was. It was probably an early form of Arabic. But like any international city, like New York today, with all the traders and pilgrims coming through and many staying and living there, making a fortune in business, languages were mixed. And so there we see a rather strange alphabet, which is not Arabic, it's not Hebrew, it's not Aramaic. We don't know what it is, but there are inscriptions around. A fascinating area is the Roman theater, which dates from before the Common Era to 27 AD when it was built. Again, carved out of the red stone surrounding Petra, with the rooms above, probably for important people to sit and to assist at the shows, the plays, the concerts, whatever was going on. Again, showing the Roman influence in this ancient city, as well as the Greek influence. Romans and Greeks were famous for building their huge theaters where Greek and Roman dramas would have been presented. We assume that the leading notables of a city like Petra would be fluent in Greek and possibly Latin, since Greek and Latin were the principal languages of business at that time, much like English is the language of business today. Now, the last centuries, BC, and the first centuries, AD, were crucial periods. In 70 AD, the Romans destroyed the city of Jerusalem, destroyed Solomon's temple, and exiled the Jews. Well, they fled everywhere. We are most aware of the Jews going to the Roman Empire, up into Germany, even in Poland, Spain, where they became known as the Sephardic Jews, other Jews settling in Greece and Rome and Turkey, large numbers of Jews settled in Egypt. Another less known group were the Jews who went directly south. If you look at the map on the right, you see Jerusalem, and Petra was occupied by the Roman Empire. And many Jews went through Petra and then went further south into the Arab Peninsula, where they ended up settling and creating their own little kingdoms, their own cities, at times even seizing power and ruling over empires in the peninsula. Now, when the Jews were exiled and the temple was destroyed, this was a terrible crisis for the Jews. And when they got to Petra or the other places, they had to decide, well, what can we do to preserve our religion, our beliefs, our traditions? Well, the Jews who settled in Petra and Egypt and Ethiopia and Arabia built temples where they would find someone who had been a priest in the Jerusalem temple. So they would build a temple for him, such as the ones we see on the right, which is in Egypt. And there the priests would continue to offer sacrifices, animals, and hold their sacred rituals in a temple. The Jews who went to Europe developed a very different form of Judaism, and this is what we call synagogue Judaism, where they no longer had priests who sacrificed animals, but rather they had the worship of a book. So the Petra and the Arabian and African Judaism was transformed into a mobile Judaism. Build your temples wherever you are at. And here we see the Elephantine temple, which was in Egypt. So they didn't have rabbis, they had priests. They had a mobile type of Judaism, which they took with them, building temples wherever they went. Well, this was just one form of Judaism at the time. We had the Essenes who built monasteries. We had Samaritans who had their own Bible and form of worship. Karaite Jews of Central Asia developed a different form of Judaism. In Arabia, the Jews established kingdoms. We had Queen Judith, who seized power in Ethiopia and persecuted the Christians mercilessly and forced the Ethiopians to convert to Judaism. We had kingdoms in Yemen. You can see on the right, these were kingdoms which grew and expanded and replaced the kingdom in Jerusalem. Christianity, at the same time as the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD, Christianity was a growing new religion, spreading throughout the Greek and the Roman world through missionaries, having their own book, which we call today the New Testament. St. Paul traveled throughout the ancient world, what is today Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, Turkey, Greece, even into Rome itself. Well, like Judaism, this new religion adapted. The church in Ethiopia, for example, celebrated the Jewish holidays, as well as these new Christian holidays. St. Thomas went to India, where a whole new form of Syriac Malabar Christianity emerged. Egypt developed monasteries and their own liturgical language. Constantinople, the Greek Orthodox Church. In Rome, the Roman Catholic Church. Well, the early Christians had a lot of issues to resolve. What was this Father, Son, and Holy Spirit business about? What is the Trinity? Who was going to lead the religious communities? Bishops, patriarchs, popes. Mary, did she remain a virgin after birth? Monasteries, should they be built way out in the desert where people would meditate? The early Christians developed sacred languages, Aramaic, Latin, Greek, Coptic, Gaiz in Ethiopia. What kind of liturgy were they going to have? Should they worship on Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath, or should they worship on Sunday, the day of resurrection? Or should they worship on both days, as the Ethiopians said? So these were the kinds of ideas that were circulating in the world, where Jews and Christians would go south into Ethiopia and Egypt and Arabia, passing through Petra. Business people spread these new religions, and new ideas were constantly emerging. St. Anthony and St. Paul of Thebes developed the ancient monasteries of Egypt and Ethiopia and Arabia. This is one of the Christian churches of Petra, dating to the 3rd century, up on a hilltop outside of Petra. It's called the Ridge Church because it was up on a hill, showing that in the 3rd century, Petra had a large Christian population. This is another church dating from the Byzantine period, showing the mosaics, well preserved with the tent in Petra, but testifying to a Christian presence. The Crusaders, when they were conquering the Middle East and liberating Jerusalem from the Jews and the Muslims, also built a fort outside Petra. Since Petra was the gateway to Arabia, it also meant that it was the first stop of invaders coming from Arabia. Islam emerged at the 600s, and once again, Muslims following the Prophet Muhammad, started spreading the new religion, opposing worship of many gods, saying that Islam was the culmination of religious evolution, which began with Adam, whole series of prophets, including David and Solomon and Jesus and Moses, culminating in the religion of Islam, the most perfect religion according to the Muslims. And so the Muslims surged out of Arabia, going north, conquering Petra after a great battle, since it was the gateway to the Mediterranean world. And from Petra, they went north into what is today Turkey and Greece. They spread to Gaza and across into Egypt. So Petra was crucial in the spread of Islam. In fact, the Quran refers to Petra and various surahs saying that wonderful signs were experienced in the city of Petra by the early missionaries who were coming out of Arabia and spreading this new religion. Well, as Islam spread, it became a requirement for Muslims to do their pilgrimage to Mecca. So throughout the Middle East, Petra was the gateway to the Arabian Peninsula. They would gather in Petra, form caravans, and go down the coast of Arabia to the newly declared holy city of Mecca. And Petra was the gateway to the expansion. You see the map on the left. Coming from Arabia, spreading north. Once they conquered Petra in the Great Battle of Tubuk in 630, the gateway to the Mediterranean world was open, and eventually Egypt and modern-day Turkey, Syria, Iraq would become Muslim. Well, 632, Petra was occupied, was conquered by the Muslims. And from then it was easy going to Jerusalem, to Egypt, on to Spain, Constantinople. And this was the most important city for the spread of Islam. Well, Petra today remains a fascinating place to visit. Guidebooks. It's become rather touristy. You see all of these shows, sound and light shows that they put on in the area in front of the famous treasury. But it was a lost city. It was only rediscovered in 1812 by the Swiss explorer Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, who wrote a book on his travels in Syria and the Holy Land, where he drew sketches of, here we see the treasury carved into the mountain. And it was one of the great discoveries of all times, like Angkor Wat, like the other lost cities. We're still waiting to rediscover the lost city of Atlantis, but just recently I was in Africa and visited the lost city of Great Zimbabwe. There is now a museum. It is declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and UNESCO has done massive research into it. When I was there, the museum did not exist yet, but it was well on its way to becoming a major archaeological must visit. Jordan, Petra joins Machu Picchu, the lost cities of the Mayas in the Yucatan, Great Zimbabwe's, Angkor Wat. All of these lost cities recently discovered are fascinating places to visit. It was a major trading city until 700 when it basically became a lost city and lost its importance. But yet, people are thrilled by it. Writing books, Petra, the Lost City of Stone, just one of the three books and movies that people like Indiana Jones are thrilled in exploring. And in fact, Petra was a scene for many of the scenes of the Last Crusade with the great intrepid explorer Indiana Jones. So it is a tourist must see. Now you can take a balloon and go up and view it from above, which is very important because, as I showed earlier, so many of the famous buildings are outside the limits of the valley itself. Surrounding the area, going for miles, are temples, tombs, the remains of huge plantations and farms. So it is a must see. Well, thank you for visiting me for this rapid tour of the great city of Petra. I'm constantly thrilled by how religions evolve, and Petra was this trading post where the gods of the Greeks and the Romans and the Egyptians and the Muslims and the Arabs and the Persians and the Babylonians and the Jews and the early Christians, it was a petri dish forming new religions where religions met. Can you imagine the Prophet Muhammad and other people sitting around a campfire arguing religion? The time when Judaism was in transformation, Islam was being born, Christianity was being riddled with heresies and crusades. But yet, this was an exciting time for the lost city of Petra. Well, thank you for joining me. This is Dr. Ronald J. Brown logging off, and thank you for joining me.